It's Monday, March 12th, 2012. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geeknights. Tonight, network-mounted storage.
Let's do this.
Oh my gosh, we're back. I feel like it wasn't that long ago we did a We're Back show, but we're back again.
Yep.
I was in India.
And we're going to be away again once PAX East shows up in a few weeks.
Yep, but PAX East is not most of the normal week. I mean, we'll be back Monday. We could still do a show, I guess.
Maybe. I was at the Dwayne Reed today, and I saw some Easter candy, and I was like, oh my God.
PAX. So,
I
unrelatedly,
bought one egg. It was 89 cents.
One of my coworkers is like, hey, you want to try some candy? And I'm like, what do you have that is going to surprise me? He busted out some salmiakki, and I'm like, let me tell you about salmiakki, son.
I've had that shit.
Oh, Turkish peeber, but PAX is coming.
Which kind did he have?
He had the normal, the same kind that we like get.
You didn't have the racing wheel?
No, I was like, so you haven't had Dragster whatever, or Death's Head, or Turkish peeber.
What was he like shocked that you knew what this was?
Not really, because I have a reputation for...
Now they've gotten used to the fact that we are on the internet, we're worldly people, we know things.
Well, the thing
you
is, this
can't
guy's
surprise me with some secret candy from a foreign land.
This guy is one of the smart, young, and cool developers who is going to be at PAX, and in fact, his girlfriend is making their costumes because they are cosplaying.
That's what?
I think Mega Man and Rock or something.
Not bad.
I forget it. Mega Man and Roll something.
Rock is Mega Man.
I said Mega Man, but I should have said Rock and Roll, but not everyone would know what that is because this is Monday and not Tuesday.
I know what that is.
But anyway, I was in India, and we will do a show at some point on a Thursday about my experiences in India. It was awesome.
And we'll try to cut back on the racist stereotypes.
Indian food, pretty great in India. Drinking water, not so great in India.
No kidding.
But the biggest thing I have to say, and I say this every time I leave the country, I was in India. In fact, I was in Mumbai and Hyderabad. Mumbai was not that long ago racked with pretty serious recent terrorist attacks. This is a city and a nation that has a real problem with actual terrorist attacks. So when I got on a plane to fly from Mumbai, where terrorist attacks just happened, to Hyderabad, I go to the airport. I did not have to take off my shoes. I did not have to go through a body scanner or get groped. The security line from start to I can get on the plane took less than a minute and a half. So you know what?
What did they do? You just walked through a metal detector?
I walked through a metal detector. It beeped. And you know what the guy did? He said, come here. He waved a metal detector, a hand one, over me for like 2 seconds.
You mean what they used to do in the year 2000 in the United States?
He found the beep. The beep was my cell phone in my pocket.
That you should have taken out.
They didn't care. He touched it from the outside, touched this big lump, used his human skills to determine that it was probably a cell phone and not, in fact, a gun. Did not even ask me to take it out of my pocket.
Was there an x-ray for your goods?
Yes, my bag went through an x-ray. Did not have to take my laptop out of my bag. My bag, in fact, included a giant lithium-ion battery, a bigger lithium-ion battery, a Kindle, a DS, a laptop, and a laptop charger.
So a bunch of bombs.
And the x-ray guy looked at it, and I saw what his screen looks like.
A bunch of colors on a white background.
The guy looked at it. He paused on my bag, kind of like looked at the screen for a few seconds, and then waved it through.
So he was actually doing his job.
He was. You know what?
Otherwise, he wouldn't have stopped.
You know what the moral of all this is?
If I had that job, I'd just hold the button down and be like, fall asleep.
You know what the moral of this is? Fuck you, TSA. I am sick of your motherfucking bullshit.
It's not a new moral.
Seriously, countries with real terrorists do not go through the level of inane security theater bullshit that you make me go through.
This isn't news.
I'm not saying it's news. I'm just, every time I leave America.
It's 10 years old, this news.
It only pisses me off more.
11 years old
I
even.
cannot deal with the TSA. And in fact, the international flight back home, right? Security, even less. Even less. So, that security aside, I got through security, right? And then in the airport, because it was a flight going to the United States, and the United States doesn't trust anyone else's security, we all had to go through security again at the terminal. Where there they had TSA signs up, and they had like the 311 rule and all that stuff. And you know what? They actually just did the exact same thing they did before. They didn't do anything different. They just went through the motions to satisfy the TSA and the paranoid US bullshit, but I just have to say it every time I leave the country. Fuck you. I hate the TSA.
They'll be
Oh
gone
my
soon
God.
enough.
Will they?
There's pushing backs.
So that's why I get to my news, because
Great.
at least
It's gonna be more of the same.
arguably the problem with the TSA, at least they say, all right, they can justify the body scanners, that they will catch things that maybe metal detectors wouldn't catch.
No, they can't.
But every news story I see talks about how all the things they catch are things that the metal detectors caught.
We've known that they're bullshit for a long time. That's
But we
not
knew they were
news.
bullshit because they didn't catch anything you wouldn't already catch. But it turns out they can't even catch the stuff they're supposed to catch that the metal detectors can't catch. And this guy showed that not only are they useless security theater bullshit, but it is trivial to trick them into not seeing the things that they're supposed to be able to catch. All you have to do is tape the metal up against your skin, and it's invisible.
Yeah.
Invisible. So at this point, I've decided that it's not even political maneuvering. It's not even security theater to keep the mouth breathers happy or whatever. It is straight up corruption. The people who make the scanners had corruption happen to get them in the airports and to suppress.
I don't know. Why, are you just discovering this now?
No, I'm confirming it. It goes from
confirming. It's like the 10th. All right, now we've got 30 confirmations. That's enough confirmations, guys.
Because Scott,
now
we
we
did not
know
have,
for sure.
This is the first time someone basically completely broke them. This is like all the way over the edge.
I don't know if you saw that German video that was multiple years ago on the show where the guy walked through the scanners and then like pulled all the shit out of his pockets.
Yeah, but this guy did it
How is this different?
This one actually was different. You should read the article about specifically the vulnerability he found.
Yeah, I
and
saw
the
that.
TSA's response, which was interesting. They said, don't report on that.
Yeah.
Now, if it's so trivial to break them, I cannot help but think that if there were any manner of QA testing, they would have found these vulnerabilities. So either they were suppressed because someone had a vested money interest, or everybody in the world is incompetent.
It's like you're saying like the shock thing. It's like, oh my God, Rim. Oh my God.
I didn't say it was
Cigarettes
shocking.
cause cancer. I know.
I didn't
right?
even
It's
say it was
amazing.
news. All I'm saying is that the mountain of evidence.
There's such a mountain of evidence now. It's concrete. There was definitely corruption in the tobacco industry. It's set in stone now.
Yeah.
Have you seen this story? This dude died of lung cancer. He smoked his whole life.
So Scott, every time I leave the country and I come back and I run into this shit, I just have to take my pile of bullshit. I left, I came back, I have a new pile of bullshit. I got to dump it somewhere.
Every time I walk down the street and there's a guy smoking, I just got to take that pile of bullshit and dump it out again.
Yep. Well, Scott, where am I going to put it? I mean, my bullshit landfill is full. So I got to dump it on the internet. I got to put it in your brain.
The cigarette butt landfill is full.
Yeah, so I'm dumping it in all of your brains to get it out of my brain.
All right.
It's an interesting article, though, mostly because we're getting to the point where at least when bullshit like this happens, any average dude can pretty much, because, you know, it's easy to verifiably break stuff like this, publicly break it and just wave it in their faces.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here is some local news.
Oh.
New York City news, right? That is actually the opposite of corruption.
Uh-huh.
You may have known previously that, you know, New York City has had various, you know, initiatives where, like, they wanted people to make New York City apps, and they would open various New York City data in, you know, good and maybe not as good, but still open ways to get people to make apps, you know, especially MTA type stuff, things like that, right? There is a new law. It is a law, not a bill or anything like that. Bloomberg signed it. It is number 29A, blah, blah, blah. It basically says, yeah, all public domain data in New York City has to be open and available on the internet for free. And by 2018, not only will it be available, it will also be in one place. There'll be like one New York City data website that will have all the New York City data that is public in one spot, and you can just get at it and make all sorts of crazy apps and shit.
Interesting.
How you like that? And not, so it won't just be like subway schedule. I guess it'll also be like plowing routes, and who can imagine all kinds of crazy shit. What's in stock at the library, schedule of when the sewer's gonna get fixed.
I look forward to like the craziest, most intrusive use of this information to figure out some
how
weird
much
correlation.
traffic goes through the tunnels every day, where the street fair is gonna be. this weekend. I can't even I'm just trying to imagine all the crazy data that's out there.
Oh my God, the street fair thing would be great because I could use street fairs.
There is a ghetto static HTML website that tells you where the street fair is going to be.
I know, but
weekend.
I've decided, I've realized kind of fundamentally on the internet that in the early days, pull information like that was all I needed. Because if I care about X, I will do a pull on X and get X. But now there's so much information available that I could conceivably use. It is not worth my time to pull it. So I need an aggregated puller. The problem is the data isn't all these difficult to access. Every format is different one-off cases to where it's not worth my effort.
It's why I have TTTTTTTT is great.
Yeah. Except it doesn't support G+, which is the thing I actually
that's
really want to use it
G+ doesn't have an API.
I know, which is the biggest thing holding me back from really using G+.
I just set it up to where now Twitter, Facebook, G+ are all sort of linked up as much as possible.
Yep.
So I don't really care which one it is. I'll open up any one of the three and I'm fine. Whatever. I don't care anymore.
I've really, in general, though, cut down on kind of my inbound and outbound data streams.
I had a huge cutting down of the reading too many websites, and I did a little bit of up on the social bits. But the reason I upped the social bits is because I unfollowed the fuck out of and unfriended a zillion people. So now it's like I go to Twitter and I can go there twice a day and read a bunch of tweets and tweet a bunch, but I'm only following 70 people instead of 170 people. So it's like,
wow,
oh,
I'm only following 73 people now, and that was before I did an unfollow.
Yeah, let me go see how many I unfollowed all the people.
I have long had a policy of never, ever reciprocating follows or friends or anything. In fact, on YouTube, I refuse to even engage in the social side because
I'm following 118 people. That's more than I thought.
All 118 of those people have interesting tweets that you want to read on a daily basis?
No, actually, the thing is, most of those people, right, don't even tweet that often, so I'll never even see a tweet from them. There's only a very small number of them that actually tweet. Yeah. Anyway.
So one last little bit of news, because a long time ago, Google cars and the Google self-driving thing has been going along for a long time. And, we made a big deal about how Nevada was finally going to allow driverless cars and automated cars with restrictions. This stuff has to be regulated. It's a brand new industry that's slowly going to come on board. Big leaps are happening. California is now has pending legislation that will do the same thing. This is actually a huge deal because California is a place where there's enough of a market to where Google could probably start selling these cars to actual rich people who will use them in real life situations.
I can't wait until the law is, people can't be trusted to drive. People get into accidents this rate of the time, and the automatic cars get in accidents at this rate, so you're not allowed to drive, period, unless it's a track. And oh, by the way, all the city bus drivers are out of work.
What's amazing to me is that a lot of the comments on this article are people who are saying, but they're not safe. I would never trust a computer to drive me around. It's like, really, Slashdot? This is what you've become?
Yeah,
the old man with the cane?
They're safer than you driving.
I don't, people make the argument that, they have to be perfectly safe or we can't trust them. And
no, they just have to be safer than human drivers.
Which is a pretty low bar on average.
Yeah, or we can do the thing, there are probably human drivers who are safer than the computer driver. They probably exist. Michael Schumacher is probably going to drive you.
So maybe the rule should be if you are a human driver who cannot get above a certain bar in the test, then you have to use an automated car or you can't drive.
The driving test will be hard as balls. But here's the thing, right? So let's say we already did a show on this sort of.
Yeah.
You're a low-skilled human driver. You have an automated car, right? You're sitting there. It does malfunction legitimately.
All you have to do is slam on the brakes and avoid obstacles.
Yeah,
I think everyone can do that.
I'm just saying, right? It's like you've never
the law here
you don't even
is
know how to drive. You've never driven because you don't need to. You have automatic cars.
Well, the law is still interesting.
It's that anime. What was that anime called? Hard Driver or something?
It was shitty.
It was.
It looked really good. I thought it was going to be good. It was terrible. Anyway, but the law still states that a driver has to be in the vehicle capable of and ready to take control of the car. So you still can't drive drunk or, talking on your cell phone or whatever. But the reason I bring this up that is noteworthy is that our government, as slow as it is actually, for the first time, maybe in the last 100 years, making legislation before we come to a critical like crisis point of technology?
Well, because it's something that the government can more easily understand,
I
right?
think it's more because this is the one area where Google is putting its money into the political arena.
That also.
Think about it. Google, with its crazy amounts of money, enough money to buy the entire U.S. recording industry if they wanted, puts a pinky toe into politics and suddenly gets exactly what it wants. Interesting. Huh. But the fact that it's California means that this is the next big step, and I really think we're going to see a few rich people buying automated Google cars in the next 5 years and using them on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is going to be a huge tipping point for the technology. I now will argue that in my lifetime, I know this is an easy argument to make, Scott's prediction will come true, and we will have a shift toward humans can't drive at all unless they pass some specialized, like, I'm a car engineer test. Like, car pilot will be a rare thing.
Yeah, and you'll respect, that's the other thing I understand, right? Cars are so much more dangerous, right? Even today, you have this level of respect for the captain of a ship and the captain of a plane, right? Because they're transporting you in a vehicle and your life is in their hands, right? But there's no respect for the there's a little respect for the train engineer, but there should be more. And I guess there's some respect for the conductor, but he ain't driving, right? There should be as much respect as there is for the ship captain and the plane captain, for the bus driver, the train engineer, and the car driver. And if you do not command that level of respect, right, because of your skills at operating this dangerous transportation thing, you shouldn't be driving.
Now, the trouble is that pragmatically,
especially not with
you're
anyone
right.
else in the car.
But pragmatically, the United States is a place where without a car, you're pretty much fucked unless you live in New York.
Then let's just. I'm a tear off the Band-Aid kind of guy. No pain, no gain. I think we should just suffer greatly all at once, and then that suffering will force us to fix the real problem.
Except, it probably won't, and it would be too. You realize how much we rely on cars. Shipping in the nation would probably grind to a halt.
Which means people would fix it real quick.
No, they wouldn't,
be
because
like,
it's not an easy thing to fix. It's not. A lot of people just don't have the skills.
You'd be surprised when people are desperate how quickly they will fix, right? Like how many students, right? This is how America works. You have this mentality. You wait until the last minute, the deadline, shit's about to hit the fan, and then you get it done the last minute. The thing is, we've got things set up to where there never is the deadline. There never is the last minute. So it's just like, we got to make it to where like, now is the time. You're fucked. If you don't fix it by the end of the week, you're screwed. People will fix it by the end of the week.
Scott, I don't think they would, because
same way they write the paper 1 hour before the class.
Scott, my experience has been that good driving is not something that most people are capable of quickly.
Oh, I don't think they'll solve it by good driving.
So what are they going to solve it by?
Trains.
Scott, it takes years to build a new train network.
Yeah, but when people need the train to get to work, they'll fucking knock down people's houses real quick.
No, they won't.
Yes, they will.
Pragmatically, the Google car is actually a good solution because trains only make sense in very high population density areas and between geographically similar high population density areas.
Also, people will fucking move to where trains are.
No, they won't. Moving is not something people can do quickly. You greatly overestimate people's ability.
They will when they're forced to.
No, they won't, because there are kind of non-fungible problems that they can't overcome that quickly.
Then maybe they'll stay there and die, and then people will only be living where the trains are.
This is why I take the pragmatic approach.
Not a bad idea.
Cars, it's kind of like, trains are more like token ring. In certain specialized areas, they're much better because they're extremely
Token ring
reliable.
is not better for anything.
It is in the sense that
no one uses token ring for
Scott,
anything these
actually,
days, except for an old token ring
Scott,
that still exists.
Manufacturing still uses token bus.
A brand new token ring no one would make.
Token bus is still used, and you don't want to know why?
In a brand new factory?
Scott, the reason they use things like token buses is because while they may have high latency and low bandwidth, they have perfectly reliable latency. There's no such thing as jitter.
But there are plenty of other alternatives that also have the same
like
reliability.
What? Like what?
You can use like the CAN bus or various other buses that are not the token bus.
Scott, do you even know what token bus is? It's not the same as token ring.
I'm just saying.
And anyway, that aside, the token ring analogy is that it is a purpose-built, like it was a deterministic system as opposed to the early Ethernet, which was packet-based. distributed transportation in a place where population is distributed and work and life and home and all these things are distributed in a semi-randomized fashion, you can't have a train that goes to those places in an efficient manner. But you can have very small packet switch cars that go. The problem with cars is that, by and large, people are shitty drivers.
Well, you shouldn't have built the houses like that in the first place, thus requiring the cars. If you would have built the houses all close to each other to begin with, you wouldn't have this problem.
But even New York, other than certain high traffic times, taking a cab pretty much anywhere in the city is still faster than taking mass transit.
Yeah, but it's not faster if everyone did that.
Exactly.
And if everyone took the train, then it'd be even better. Because then,
but
the
the
G train
reality
would run.
is, we have this existing infrastructure that even if we make strides to get rid of it over time, we can't just immediately transplant millions of people.
Free bicycles for everybody.
Yeah.
No cars on the road.
Rather than building
work real
trains
well.
everywhere, because that's a crazy solution, you build trains where trains make sense, and you use this sort of packet switch cars driven by computers model, computerized buses
But
that
how are
take
you
the
going to
place
replace
of
every
Amtrak.
car with a computer car?
It takes time.
That's boring.
Yeah, but it's pragmatic and it works.
Yeah, but it means that by the time nothing's going to be solved, even when we're dead, because it'll take so long.
But one big problem will be solved. By the time I'm old, I can still get around no matter where I live because I'll have the Google car.
Sure. So X-Driver, there was an OAV that was 6 episodes.
That show was terrible.
There was an XD, Danger Zone OAV that was 1 episode.
That show tricked us because
there was a movie that was 62 minutes long. That was 1 movie.
the Oh My Goddess guy did the character designs, and it looked beautiful, and it was about cars. It was just stupid.
And there was a manga, but I can't figure out how many volumes it was.
Anyway. But anyway, things of the day. What do you got for me?
So, the classic Bugs Bunny cartoon, What's Opera Doc? The spear and
One of my favorites.
the spear and magic helmet. It's everyone's favorite, right?
I like the opera singer one a little better.
Yeah, well, anyway, but there was some guy made a remix of it a while ago from 2005, right? And DJ BC made this remix in 2005. But just now, in 2012, some guy, I don't know if it's the same guy or a different guy, remixed the video to go along with that remix song. And now it is much more presentable and accessible and entertaining on the YouTube than the song in MP3 format alone. And thus, that is now quality enough to become a thing of the day. You should watch it. It's only got like 302 views. And it actually has like 4 dislikes. And I'm like, what?
I realized, watching YouTube videos and messing around with statistics and everything, that it seems like any new video that goes up gets some dislikes no matter what it is after a certain amount of time.
The thing is, like, I don't dislike anything. Like, I just never, like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't remember this video, but like, I'll never feel like dislike. Like, I'll never get that feeling to go and do that. Like, I don't even know why they even have the thumbs down there. I don't know. Whatever. Who cares?
Yeah, that's an interesting. We could talk about the design of that and what it does. There's a game there.
Yeah, but it's like I never even think to click thumbs down. Maybe if I watched a video and it was painful, I might think to click it, but it's never happened.
So, He-Man is horrible. You should never watch it if you didn't know better. Unless it's the live-action movie, which I kind of want to watch again so we can do a show on it.
Or unless it's for research purposes.
Yeah, but even then, it's rough.
It is.
I would suggest if you ever want to research He-Man, have someone do the research of the show who never saw it as a child and thus will not realize that they were in fact an idiot when they were 5 years old.
Also, the toys are kind of okay. The comic books are a lot like the show.
I've never read the comic books. I'm kind of intrigued.
It was originally a comic book. I think it's British, if I'm not mistaken.
I was reading a Wikipedia article about it a long time ago when I thought, hey, I wonder if He-Man was good. I remember trying to figure out what Skeletor's deal was because I realized as a kid, I never, in my entire childhood of watching He-Man religiously, had any idea what Castle Grayskull actually was or who the fuck Skeletor was.
I kept trying to understand. Like, when I was a kid also, I couldn't really understand
I was like, what does He-Man
it.
want?
I
What
was
is
like,
Skeletor after?
It's like Castle Grayskull was like the big toy, but it's like they spent most of their time in this other castle that was more fancy and futuristic, and they hardly ever went to Castle Grayskull that I could remember, and it was just weird. And this is why you don't watch He-Man.
Yep, but anyway, here's a compilation of a good number of the insults that come out of Skeletor's skeleton mouth. And
Hey, Rim.
Yeah.
You have shitty things in your day.
it's pretty great. It reminded me
You
both how great
dim nut
He-Man
wit.
was and how terribly great He-Man was.
You said was is not the wrong term. He-Man still is.
No, it isn't. It's not an is. It's a was.
It doesn't exist anymore?
The He-Man that I saw as a child is a was, because that can never be experienced again except through the mind of an idiot child.
I could just bash you over the head a whole bunch of times.
That might work. So,
All right.
in the meta moment, we're going to be at the Penny Arcade Expo. Holy shit.
Oh, gee, I didn't see that coming.
Oh my God, it's coming. It's coming. We're going to be there. I picked my book club book, but I'll do a separate show where we talk about why. But a little heads up, the book club book is going to be The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins.
I have
because
not heard the positive things. It seems to be...
I've heard nothing but positive things. Everyone's flipping out about this book, and the movie's coming, so I want to see what the deal is.
Yeah, but this isn't the kind of positive buzz you usually hear about something that's actually good. It's like I can sort of tell by the smell.
It's the same kind of buzz I got from, let's see, Harry Potter.
And Twilight and those
Yeah,
sorts of things that
So-
people like but aren't actually good.
So I'm going to let you in on a secret that I'm not going to say on the Real Book Club Book Show. I read the whole book while I was at the airport, and it's actually pretty good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like I thought I'd read it to then do a book club book show about, yeah, you guys like this book, but it's kind of crap, Battle Royale, whatever. But you know what?
That's what I heard. I heard it was crappy Battle Royale ripoff.
It's more like Running Man crossed with 1984.
Which Running Man?
The Arnold, of course.
Oh, that, okay. 'Cause
Who out there but you knows about your Running Man?
all of Korea. South
Yeah.
Korea.
Outside of Korea, who else?
Conrad.
Yeah, so Arnold Running Man, but 1984 style with a little bit of I'd buy that for $1. It's pretty good. More so than I expected. That's going to be the book club book.
Well, if you read it just at the airport, then I could probably read it real fast.
It's short. It's well written. I don't know what I can say. And you know what?
Isn't there multiples of them?
I only read the first one, but it is, in fact, I think, a trilogy.
Great. Thrilling.
Well, we're only doing the first book.
Yeah, fine.
Oh, I just figured out what the third book's going to be about because the title, anyway.
Gives it all away?
Maybe.
Maybe. Maybe I'll have to pick a book of evil next time.
Why
Maybe
would
I
you
should
pick a
read-
book of evil?
Well, since you've read this entire book already, maybe I'll read it extra quickly and we'll do this book club right away and then get it out, and then I'll come out with something else.
Well, if you do something I don't like, I got to warn you, the non-fiction's coming out.
No.
I'll do that, the Norman Davies book I'm reading right now.
I'll have to count.
400 pages of, like, Prussian history.
I'll have to counter with ultimate fiction.
Scott, you counter with ultimate fiction. I'll counter with the Count of Monte Cristo.
I can counter with Ulysses.
You're seriously going to read Ulysses. That's like coming to me with the Davy Crockett nuclear artillery and even trying to make a threat.
It's basically
For you listeners who are not aware, the Davy
Rim will
Crockett...
listen to reason is that kind of...
The Davy Crockett artillery
Got a nuke in the motorcycle
was notable
situation.
in that it was nuclear artillery whose range was such that the person firing it was inside of the blast.
That is correct.
So yeah, Hunger Games is going to be the book club book.
Great.
I cheated because I already read it, and it was pretty good.
Great. All right.
Internet, YouTube channel, all that stuff. So, we were trying to figure out what to do a Monday show on this morning, and I wanted to do the fixed protocol, a single protocol.
Which
And then
nobody cares about.
Actually, I think people would, because I think there's a lot to talk about related to the fixed protocol. Why it's the way it is a nice study of how to design a protocol for a thing.
Maybe. In
It
general. And from that general perspective, maybe someone cares. But no one, I think, that is not a financial person gives a shit.
I think they would. Anyone who's technological, if you want a job that pays a lot of money, knowing the fixed protocol at all, you'll know it more than the majority of tech people in the financial world, and you will be in surprisingly high demand. But you have to be okay with writing software to interface between the fixed protocol and arbitrary middleware, as in like LLM or 59 West or stuff like that. Maybe like ActiveMQ. But I digress. So then we started talking about other acronyms and, should we do a show on FTP?
If we can do a show on that acronym, let's just do a show on every acronym one by one, and that'll fill us with Monday shows forever.
And it's kind of a good idea, but some acronyms are more equal than others. I mean, FTP, there is literally nothing interesting to say about FTP.
Put,
other than
get,
passive
list.
versus active FTP is something that no one out there actually understands.
There's
and-
also a binary and ASCII mode.
Yep. Except binary by default. Duh.
Duh.
Who even uses ASCII mode for anything?
You want to send a text file.
Yeah, binary mode. Jesus. Otherwise, you're going to run into the whole Unix versus Win anyway.
Well, that's if it's a Unicode text file.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about if you have an ASCII text file, for reals.
Who has that?
Maybe.
And needs to FTP it. The real problem is passive versus active. Do you know the difference? Because I don't. It's
I
not,
did. I
Did you
remember
really?
it every time that I have to engage with it. I
Did you
remember what the
really?
deal is, and then I forget it again.
It only matters to the guy who manages the firewall between two people who just want to transfer a file.
Isn't it one like the ports? Oh, isn't it like one where like the ports open and you're holding it, and then it's like you hold the TCP/IP connection open all the time, and the other one is
It's a little more complicated than that.
You send the packet to when you want to do something, and then it opens you up another port where you send
It's
your thing, and then you close that.
Kind of. It's a little more complex. Remember, FTP has two channels. It has the file sending channel and the command control channel.
Yep.
So it has to do, basically, the simple way to put it is you pick passive or active depending on who you want the firewall configuration to be a pain in the ass for. The guy on the other side or the guy who manages your network.
The guy
That's
with the
it.
server has to do the pain in
You know
the
what
ass
the real
shit.
answer
That's
is?
the answer.
Use SCP and or SFTP.
But then you have to share keys and stuff and make account, something like that, which is annoying.
Nobody does that in the real world. As far as I found, the majority of techies just use password SSH and that's it.
That's awful.
But I digress. So we were talking about acronyms, and we realized we'd never actually done a show on, like, network-mounted storage.
Well,
like,
we did a show about NASs and why you should get one, but we didn't talk about the specifics of the different, technologies, protocols that are used to actually share the files and mount storage, connect storage devices to other computers across a network. Like CIFS, Samba, NFS, DRBD, all these guys. We didn't talk about those guys.
In fact, I'm pretty sure we said, good NAS will let you share all those arbitrary protocols.
You can even there's even like HTTP mounts, SSH mounts, there's all kinds of stuff out there.
Yep. So we figured we'd go through some of those and kind of talk, it's a nice way to, I always try to find tech topics because Scott insists that Monday shows should be about technology itself and not like pseudo-technology, like commenting on blogs.
Yeah.
Or, the industries around
Because that's
technology.
that's a media topic that is only technological because everything is technological, right? I mean, you want to, we could take the excuse and do a show about journalism. Well, because every industry now in the world,
everything is not technological.
Technology has its grip on everything in our entire society.
True, but
so we could do a show about chemical factories, and it's a technological show
Scott,
because there's computers in chemical factories.
Let's do a show about the sole biological processes of pooping.
Well, that's a science show, which is okay for Monday.
Okay, so science or technology.
Right, but if you want to talk about journalism, that's a social topic. That's not a technological topic.
Pooping, journalism. So,
whatever.
I don't think most people out there actually really, even technologists, know about these things or use them.
Well, I think the thing is a lot of people who do use them, they know like the commands maybe or what you have to do to make them work, but they don't actually know how they work or what's going on down low. And I don't really know half as much as I should.
Yeah.
Because I tend to just look up the commands, make it work, and that's it.
I knew a lot more than I do now because I use, IT, like that was part of my education was like the lowdown, like SMB, like the protocol itself. We learned a lot of core technology that has not actually been applicable in my later life.
Because no one uses that shit anymore.
But even, there's some basic stuff you should know. So you want to start with SMB because I guess that's the one most people know about and use.
Well, SMB is also known as Samba because there was an open source thing called Samba that was the open source SMB sort of client server software.
You know it as effectively, you'll think of it as Windows file sharing.
Well, the old Windows file sharing.
Yeah, well, the new Windows file sharing is pretty much CIFS.
Right, which is Active
SMB.
Well, it's Active Directory as opposed to workgroups.
No. Active Directory is nothing more than a glorified LDAP. It's a directory structure to list stuff. It has nothing to do with the sharing itself. It's just the authentication for it.
Right, but that's what goes, CIFS is basically the SMB that goes with the Active Directory, whereas SMB Active Directory is like, old busted.
That's a conflation that you should not go down that road because you're very close to being wrong. Let's just talk about file sharing. So
Sure.
Windows file sharing.
I'm sure we should first mention that SMB and such also does like printer sharing and all sorts of weird shit like that.
Yep. Do you know what SMB stands for?
Is it like symmetric multi something?
No.
Okay.
CIFS is like Common Internet File System.
I
But
knew
I
that.
actually did not even know the acronym to SMB ever, so I had to look it up.
I thought it was like symmetric multi.
No. Server message block.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's one of those things where you try to guess and you're wrong. Like
You're never
ISA,
gonna get that one.
I never would have guessed when I was first learning about hardware that ISA was like industry standard architecture.
You didn't know that?
When I first learned about computers, I looked at this bus and I was like, all right, the acronym must have something to do with the bus.
Nope.
Nope.
No. AGP does.
It does. Anyway. So SMB and CIFS are pretty much the Windows way of sharing files, and Linux actually kind of sucks at it.
Well, I mean, there is Samba, like we said, which sort of does it, and it works. Like, you can make it work, and I've made it work in the past, and OS X works, but has its weird, quirky differences when it comes to using this, but it also just kind of works. Like, you can mount and type in the major problem with both Samba, SMB, and CIFS is that when you add, the patterns of the URIs or URNs or whatever they're called, right? Because they don't look like URLs.
Yep.
Of like double backslashes and all these things.
Very non-compatible.
Right. They tend to change. Like on your Windows machine, you'd be like, oh, how do I connect to this service? Well, it's // DRV-01C2, and then it works. But then on you want to connect to the same thing on the Mac. Oh, well, it's on there. You actually have to do like SMB : / something, and it's totally different, even though it's the same exact thing in the same exact protocol. The names of the spots that you're connecting to are of different patterns, and it's really annoying as all hell. And like sometimes like it'll want you to use a password, but you won't have the password configured, but it'll ask you for one anyway, and you won't know what to type in, and it's like no one's following the same steps, even though the actual underlying protocol is the same, and the code that handles that is 90% identical. Really annoying.
Now, at the same time, though, like if you're using just Windows, it is actually a pretty great way to share files.
Yeah,
like,
it does. If you're using just Windows and you set it up properly, everything just works.
Yep.
And a lot of people, though, do have trouble with it, and it's because they do it wrong.
Oh, mostly it's because they don't understand how it works at the low level, so they try to they go to their network tab and try to browse for something that isn't on the local network, and without a Win server or a directory or something to tell their computer where the other thing is, then they're not going to find what they're looking for.
All right, so if you want to set up Windows sharing between two Windows computers or something like that, here's what you do. This is the easiest guaranteed way of making it work with no trouble. First, you got to have Windows computers that aren't fucked the fuck up. If you fuck them up, then I got no help for you, right?
Also, not old Windows computers.
Right, you have to follow the policies of Scott and never installing weird bullshit on your computer or changing settings from the defaults for no reason or any bullshit like that. Then find the folder you want to share. Right-click on that motherfucker, go to sharing, and say, share that bitch. Simple sharing, go, right? Okay, now it's shared, but no one can see it really. So what you got to do is you got to go and make a home group or a work group or whatever you want to call it.
Now, home groups are actually pretty new.
Yeah.
And
whatever Windows you got.
What's interesting is that nobody I know knows how it works or even realizes what it is. Windows kind of makes you set it up when you set up a Windows. It detects other PCs like, hey, there's a home group here. Get the code from the other computer, and it's a pretty...
Right. So the first computer you set up is the one that establishes the home group, and the other ones connect to the home group, right? And you just have to type in the same name for the home group and the same username and password if you have one on all the computers on your LAN, on the same LAN, and they'll all be in the same home group as each other, and they'll be able to see each other's shares, and they'll just be there. And then you just share the shares, and then you go double-click on My Network, and you'll see the shares in there, and you can just right-click on them and be like, mount, or connect, or open, or whatever, and all the printers or files that are shared, they'll just be there, and you can connect to them and make them work as your local printer or as your local hard drive, and your computer won't really know the difference. But there are some Windows applications I've noticed that will be like, they'll be able to detect the fact that it's a network share, and they'll be like, oh, no, I don't use network shares, and they won't go on there. But
I've never run into that.
I've run into that, where it's like, nope, I will not. I refuse to save a file to a network share. You have to save a file to a local share.
Usually that has to do with permissions being weird.
No, like specifically the program popped up a window, a dialogue that said, this program cannot use, you cannot put your like whatever library on a network share. It must be on a local disk.
That's interesting.
Like it knew.
Yeah, you could know from the way the resources anyway.
Yeah, anyway.
But really, Windows sharing, everyone I know has problems with it.
They try to do too much with it.
No. One, Windows, if you set it up by default, will often have trouble when you try to connect to a Windows share from the outside with a device that either isn't in the same work group or isn't in the domain, or if the usernames, like people will often be in like a domain or something, and then they try to log into a share on some other computer that's set up differently, and it'll ask for the account, but it'll want to use the same like username between the two. So if I have the RIM account on my PC and there's a local RIM account on the other PC, and it tries to always connect with like a default account, and then it'll say, hey, do you want to connect with other credentials? The Windows UI for using different credentials, like the other guy's username instead of your username, are actually pretty counterintuitive and usually don't work
because you don't know if
you
don't know if it's like, is it forwarding my account locally to the other computer, or does it want the account from the other computer, or what does it want?
Like my NAS.
If you don't have an Active Directory with a single sign-on for your whole network, you have no idea which account you want to use.
Like my NAS is a good example. I set it up to do simple, like standard Windows file sharing, and yet whenever I connect to it, it'll be like, hey, what account do you want to use? And if I use RIM and my password, it usually will freak out and say, and then I have to click connect with alternate credentials, type the exact same thing in, and then it'll work.
Right, because the first time it's trying to use your local RIM, which is wrong, and the second time it'll actually use the other RIM from the other side.
But on Emily's computer, where just by hook or crook, the username on the NAS is a different local account name from the local account she uses on her computer, it just wouldn't fucking let her connect.
Yeah.
And the moral of all this is that NASs tend to not really be configurable enough compared to a Windows box, and tend to implement Windows type sharing kind of shittily.
You know what I do?
And you're going to run into all these problems, and the devices tend to not give you any reasonable logs to tell you how to fix it, and your Windows PC doesn't give you any reasonable kind of errors or dialogues to tell you how to fix it. And unless you know how SMB works or CIFS works, you're not going to fix it.
Here's the solution that I have in my house. You know what it is? I have all the shares as just completely anonymous, wide open, full access shares.
Yeah, I don't do that.
And then I have network level security. So if you come into my house and try to use the internets, you'll connect on the Wi-Fi, which is a separate Wi-Fi and a separate subnet, and you won't even see that NAS, even though it's right there in front of you.
See, now the reason I didn't do that is because I have one NAS where I made 3 shares. Well, I have a private share for me and a private share for Emily. And then I have a media share that's public to anyone in my house, because, anyone around, I say like, hey, take any of my movies you want. But I want me and Emily to have write access to that and no one else to have write access. And then the most important thing,
you're getting fancy.
I have a Dropbox. So when someone's over and they're like, hey, I have this movie, I'm like, yeah, dump it on my Dropbox.
See, well, actually, the thing, I got all kinds of different stuff going on, right? So if someone wants to dump me the movie, well, the HTPC is on the local network, so they can dump it, through there. There's also, my NAS has a feature where you can put a USB stick in and push a button, and it'll just take the whole USB stick and put it on itself. So, I got a lot of ways to get files from people who want to dump. And also I don't have multiple people in the house to manage, right?
Nope.
It's just me. So I don't need to have like the separate account for the other people with the separate shares to share different things.
Also, when we have large gatherings, it tends to be at my place. So people are using my shit a lot more than they use your shit directly.
Yeah, if they want to come to my house, there's plenty of shit they can use. They just can't be accessing my files.
I let people access my files.
I don't want to access my files.
But, aside from NASs, regular Windows file sharing pretty much just works. The tricks are when you're using non-Windows devices like a NAS, or more importantly, a fucking Mac that can't connect to fucking anonymous shares because it's fucking Mac. Why do Macs handle this so poorly? Because Linux handles Samba SMB shares really poorly.
Well, it has nothing to do
Samba,
with Linux. It has to do with Samba, right? Because OS X is Unix. It's not Linux.
Yeah. So Unix and Linux, right? Many times the problems with them are not the core. GNU Linux is fine, but Samba is implemented by someone else and they don't do it that well. Problem is, because there's no other good alternative, it effectively is a Linux problem. Even though it's not really a Linux problem.
It's a Starnix problem.
It's one of those reasons why you
anything
can't-
that uses the open source Samba thing has this problem.
It's yet one other reason why Linux kind of sucks on the desktop unless you're just a developer.
Well, the thing is, if you're doing the basic stuff of just connecting, it kind of works. If you have like a standard Active Directory that's configured properly, and you have like SUSE Linux, SUSE, whatever it's pronounced, then it kind of just works. But if you got anything weird, and you have to change configurations, it's possible to make it work. It's just a nightmare.
Yep, we're not talking about using Samba to run like a Windows domain, because that's way out of scope.
Fuck
for this.
that shit.
But you should be able to mount someone else's Samba share, or someone else's Windows share on your Linux box if you install Samba and you read a FAQ. But really, for most people, it's not worth trying to get your Linux box to share two Windows boxes. You're going to run into trouble. It's usually not worth the effort.
All right, so let's talk about another really common thing. Which is
NFS.
It's the network file system.
Which is basically, sadly, the easiest to use sharing protocol if you're only using Linux boxes.
Yeah, I mean, if you're only using Unix machines, NFS just works. It's really easy. Basically, normally you would mount local block devices to places in your file system. So you'd be like, mount dev sd0 to /mnt. Done. Network file system is pretty much the same thing. It's like, hey, mount this IP address /projects to home projects. Ta-da! And it just works like that. And the permissions, the Unix file system permissions are kind of preserved and forwarded through.
Which again, this is why it doesn't work so well with Windows.
Right, which is good and bad. Because on the one hand, if you've got a bunch of machines all connecting to the same NFS and they all have the same user accounts, all good. But if on this machine, user ID 1001 is me, and on that machine, user ID 1001 is Rim, I might save a file to the NFS, and then Rim has access to it if he comes through that other computer because his user ID matches the right file system up there.
The whole fact that user IDs are used the way they are between systems in Linux has actually been a major pain for me for a long time.
Yeah. But it just works. It's easy. You just start it up, and you can connect in like 2 commands, and suddenly you have a hard drive that can be mounted on multiple computers simultaneously, and it works. And it's kind of fast. But there's some other problems, right?
Well, one, if you don't know what you're doing, there's a lot of configuration options when you set this up, and you have to do it, auto mounting, FS tab, this kind of stuff that most people don't know about.
Yeah, but it's standard Linuxy stuff, right?
It's
not that weird.
But to set up NFS, if you're just a kind of not super technical person, you're not even going to know where to start.
Ubuntu has some good documentations.
No,
that
I guess
followed.
Ubuntu. I guess I haven't set up NFS on a
You still have to hit the command line, right? It's not gonna.
Yeah, but too, if you set up NFS wrong, synchronous versus asynchronous,
I was just about to go into that.
And the other computer goes down,
Ah.
you're fucked. You are so fucked. Your NFS mount will just hang.
That's right.
And there's almost no way to fix that.
Yep.
You'll get like a zombie process. You got to reboot.
So it's basically, it works. It's simple, but it's unreliable and can get really shaky, right? There's synchronous mode and there's asynchronous mode. The synchronous mode is like, look, whenever I write a file, right, whenever I do something, wait till that finishes before you do the next thing. That way, the hard drive is always in a good way, right? We won't write half a file and fail to write the rest of it if something happens to the network, right? I mean, when you have a computer with a hard drive in it, you're pretty much going to assume, okay, serial ATA bus isn't going to fail. It's really reliable. It's basically 100% reliable for all intents and purposes. Maybe your RAID card might go down, but it's not going to flake out. Networks will continue to work, but get flaky. You might drop a packet. Well, what if I drop a packet when I'm sending a file over? Well, I hope you're in synchronous mode. Right? Otherwise, your file's now fucked up on the other end of the line. But if you're the thing with synchronous mode is that it's mad slow. And if a lot of people are using the same NFS, it's even more slow. It's ultra slow, mega slow, almost unusably slow if there's a lot going on.
NFS also, it's like Scott said, it's easy to set up, but you really have to tweak it if you want to use it in any sort of performant way. And two, nobody but other Linux boxes are going to connect. I mean, at least Linux being open, you can install Samba. And
I'm sure
connect to
you
a
can
Windows
buy
share.
crazy software that
I
lets
was
you
about
use
to
it
say,
with Windows.
there is software that gets NFS to work on Windows, but last I used it,
Fuck that shit.
it is 10 years behind Samba on Linux.
Yeah,
So
and it costs money. I've never seen it for free.
I've seen some for free. I used it at RIT actually.
Really?
It didn't work so well.
No kidding.
So if you look at Samba and think, I want to try what Samba was like 10 years ago, try getting NFS to work on a Windows PC.
Yeah. Now, the asynchronous mode, right, is pretty much the opposite. It's like, oh, it's crazy fast, and everything just sort of goes. And I actually use the asynchronous mode because it's pretty reliable on a small, tiny LAN. You know, and you only got one guy mounting, using it at a time, and I have trouble. But what if some weird stuff happens, like the network flakes out, you got mad corrupt files, and NFS doesn't even care? You might just ruin the whole thing. Who knows what can happen? Because it just doesn't care. It just sends the files back and forth as it willy-nilly and just trusts that everything coming over the line is right. So sometimes you'll save something, it'll be broken, you got to save it again. You know, that's why I keep copies of stuff on the local hard drive and the NAS and maybe the cloud, and you know, because you never know. It's not true. And you've even seen, if you really want NFS to work properly, you have to configure all sorts of weird stuff, like, you know, like chunk sizes of how many bits do you send per packet at once, and how much do you buffer up on either end, and you know, you have to actually configure all these crazy numbers to get the optimal performance, and it's really not worth it. So most people leave the defaults, which work, but you're gonna get some slowness if you ever try to do anything remotely serious.
Now, it is nice that, you know, Windows network file sharing works pretty much as well as you're going to get it to work out of the box without you having to do anything other than set up the permissions.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, you know, only gets complicated when you try to set up like a domain with like security policies and, you know, what's allowed to be shared and what isn't. You're trying to do authentication across multiple devices.
Yeah, I want the accounting department to be able to read and write these Excel files, but I don't want them to see anything else. But I want the auditors need to be able to read the Excel files but can't read them. And then I need, you know, it's like, oh my God, kill yourself.
And all the problems with SMB and CIFS really come down to devices that aren't Windows operating systems tend to implement poorly, and the logs and documentation around problems are difficult for most people to follow. NFS is deeply documented and difficult to follow for the exact opposite reason. There's too much low-level documentation.
Yep.
And I don't know, NFS just kind of sucks in the modern era, but we're forced to use it because there isn't really much better for that exact purpose.
Yeah. I want to take a side note here to talk about something called Fuse, right? So Fuse is a relatively new thing, a few years old, and it's a Linux thing primarily, not even just general Unix, just mostly Linux. But I have seen it on OS X, so I guess it's Unix in general. But what it is it's FUSE. I think it's like I forget what the F stands for, but it's basically like user-mounted file system, like something like that. Is it like full? I forget the exact. You can look it up. I don't remember. But it's basically allowed, right? So the main problem is on a Unix machine, you know, only root really has permissions to mount file systems, right? But sometimes one user, just a regular old user, has legitimate reason to mount a file system perhaps in their home directory. For example, I might SSH to another computer where I have access to files. And it would be really nice and convenient if I could mount that remote computer that I am SSH to as a local folder. Instead of using SCP and SFTP, I could just use CP and MV and all those normal file system commands by mounting that locally. Now, there's some permissions issues, right? Because if I'm mounting something with SSH locally, then my local user account needs to be the only account that has permissions on that folder. But on the remote machine, the permissions are totally different, right? Because it's what are the accounts on that machine I'm SSHing to? Totally different from the ones I have. So the chmods and the chaowns and various file system things on the local machine that I'm on need to be translated and different when they're sent over the wire or received over the wire from the remote file system, right? But basically, Fuse is this kernel module and sort of user space system that allows you to mount almost anything, right? You could mount, like, you know, you could turn anything and turn it into a file system. You could have like, I'm going to turn that website into a file system, and you could write some sort of driver that's like, okay, you mount the website, and if you open up the file at home, then you'll get the HTML for the index.html. And if it's like you can turn anything. It basically turns the file system into a user interface for anything, because you can turn, you can just write a file system driver that maps to any API, any computerized thing in the world, You could make like a video game that was in the form of a file system where like there's one file and you open it up and it gives you instructions, and then you create a file and that creates an item in your inventory and stuff like that. And all the while that's communicating with like a database somewhere with the game data in it. It's totally cool. And you should try to, see all the kind of crazy cool things people have been able to mount. Like you can mount your friggin' scanner and, when you scan something, a JPEG appears in that folder and then you read it out. That kind of stuff works. Weird.
Now, one thing we didn't really talk about, with NFS versus SMB, we kind of hinted on when we were talking about SMB, but with Windows file sharing, home groups and work groups and, I guess Win servers don't really exist anymore in the sense that they used to.
I hope you're not using one of those.
I've set those up before.
I have pity for you.
But I think the biggest reason why Windows file sharing is so much better than the default in Linux is that it's pretty much self-organizing. Like in a typical setup, like in a house, it's one flat network. And even with the switch, all the PCs are going to find each other and you'll just kind of see all the other things you can mount on the network.
Yeah, it's the same way the OS X file sharing uses Bonjour to find all the other Macs in the local area automatically.
Yep.
Right? With Linux, you have to type in the IPs
NFS,
of the other guys.
you have to type not a host name.
No.
You don't want to use a host name. You don't want DNS lookups for that shit.
Nope. You got to type in the IP address of all the other computers. It's not just going to look around and find NFS shares on your network.
Now, you could set up some startup scripts that did some stuff. There are ways to make automated NFS mounts, but that's complicated and annoying. It doesn't self-organize.
And fragile. It will often fail. And
In the
then
extreme.
what? And then what do you do?
So we talked, these are remote mounted file systems. There's files somewhere. I want to mount those locally to access them to read or write. And one thing I found is that most people try to set this up, mostly on Linux more so than Windows, because Windows, they do it to literally, I want to give a guy files, I want to get some files from some other device. I've found people use it on Linux to do dumb shit. Like, they want it, they'll use NFS to mount their home directory remotely in Linux, which doesn't really work nearly as well as the Windows equivalent.
Nope.
There are so many problems and things can go wrong. Like, if you try to log in and your home directory isn't there, Linux does not handle that nearly as well as Windows does.
I know, right?
But what if we want to, what if I'm mounting a file system remotely because there's log files written there and I want to have a thing that greps those log files to generate an alarm?
Why don't you just have the grepper run on the log file machine?
Yeah. Or why don't you use syslog to send the relevant logs to all the places? Why mount the whole file system?
That's right.
When all you need to do is send the individual log lines that matter. Syslog, in fact, will send the logs you need to the places you need them and not send all the bullshit.
That's how I have it set up at work. I have one server, and all the other servers have syslog configured to send their logs to that one server. So if I want to see logs, I go to that one server and I look at the logs, and you know what? They're all in one big log file. So it's like, oh my God, all the varlog messages are mixed up together. But actually, I can just grep and filter that down in 1 second to just the one machine I care about.
Or I go one step further. The logs are written to their local systems, and they're archived to, with syslog to some remote system for archive purposes. One of the biggest problems in Linux is that the log files get gigantic because people are stupid.
Well, I got rotation.
Yeah, most people don't set that up.
It's default, at least on a modern distribution.
Most people don't, because they'll install some software that logs to its own place.
And this is why people say, oh, you got to mount var in a different partition in
you
case
do
it
need
fills
to.
out.
You should. People don't. But what I do is one step further. The logs are written somewhere else. They're syslogged for archival purposes with rotation out of the way. But there are agents grepping those logs, and they only send to a central location log lines that mean a human has to do something. Like, hey, error was written because shit went down.
And none of this has to involve any sort of network file system mounting.
Yeah, so anytime you need to mount a file system from somewhere else, step back and think, what do I need from that file system? And if your only answer is, this is the fastest way to do what I want to do, you're probably going about this the wrong way.
Yeah, it's usually, it's a tool that can solve a lot of problems in a very bad and problematic way that will also cause problems.
Like, look at Windows.
And there are usually, most of the time, there is a better solution besides a file share and a file server. And
Well, not even just, let's go one step
people
further.
don't do it.
The way most people use Samba is they navigate from the network to some share to get some files. Very different from, even though it's the exact same underlying technology, going to your computer and being like, mount network drive and mounting some remote location as like the U drive.
Yep.
You usually don't need to do that.
Yep.
In Linux, it's even worse. Mounting a file system is the last thing you want to do. So one level up from that, let's do it at a higher level. Tools like rsync. Rsync can probably do what you're trying to do without mounting a stupid file system.
Yeah, especially if everyone has a lot of hard drive space, rsync is a great idea, because you could just, hey, let's synchronize. Now we've got plenty of copies of the files all around.
And you can configure rsync to send something and then delete whatever happened on my local machine. You can do crazy stuff with
even
rsync.
better than rsync for a lot of things if they're files that are edited frequently. Like rsync is good if, let's say, you have a folder full of videos. Let's say you're video editors, right? And you have someone's dumping in new source material into this big folder.
Yep.
You can use rsync and you basically get all the latest source material, synchronized locally to you, and that's awesomeness, right?
Rsync is also
and
not bad.
And if some old source material got updated, you get that update.
It's also pretty good for the distribution of simple, not often reread configuration files like NTP configuration updates.
Right. But let's say that you've got something that's edited a whole bunch, like, hey, this is the Excel document we're working on. Then it's probably not the greatest idea to use rsync, because then, you get all these too many people rsyncing too frequently and it gets all broken.
Yep, or rsyncing like rapidly written to log files. That, again, you're doing something wrong. Why do you need that whole log file?
But the thing is, even network mounting will give you problems depending, because you get the situations where, like, a guy made changes and saved it. I loaded before he saved. Now I saved on top of his save. And I think Windows, if you use Office, has stuff to fight against this problem. But other than that, you're gonna have problems where a guy does work, saves it onto the network share, and someone else saves on top of him and undoes his work. And in that kind of situation, you need Git. Git is that problem solver.
Yep.
And if the network share alone does not solve that.
Now, at the same time, you can go lower. I mean, instead of mounting a remote file system, you can use a shared file system or something like DRBD, which I bring up every now and then because I'm a fan of it.
It's mad dangerous, yo.
It's dangerous if you don't understand it.
It's hard.
It's like a lightsaber.
So basically
it will kill you unless you know how to use it. But
so
if you know
imagine
how to use
this. Imagine this. I've got a bunch of servers, and I've got let's say not even have servers. I got like 3 computers, right? And all these computers have 1 hard drive each. Now, they could just use that hard drive straight up, but, I want all 3 computers to be identical.
Now, let's back up. Let's say I'm on one computer with 3 hard drives, and I want them to be identical. Well, I make a sort of like mirrored RAID.
Yeah.
So DRBD is basically RAID where the disks are on multiple computers, and it only does mirroring.
That's right. So I have 3 computers, and I DRBD them. All those computers over the network connect to the DRBD. So each computer has, and one thinks to itself that it has a real hard drive in it. It doesn't even know that it's this network mount situation. It only sees a real hard drive. It doesn't understand that it's networked, right? I mean, on the low level it does, but on the higher level, it's just regular hard drive. But that hard drive happens to be a magic network hard drive that's actually 3 hard drives wide on 3 different computers. So sitting down at any one of those computers, you'll see the exact same thing. And if I edit the file on one computer, on computer number 2, suddenly the file's edited. And you're like, what? What happened?
What the contention for, who gets to edit a file and all that stuff is handled by the file system, which has nothing to do with DRBD. DRBD is just at the block level. The hard drive itself is basic. Think of it as like a physical replica of the actual block device.
Yeah, it's even below the file system, right? Like NFS is a networked file system, right? ext3 is a file system. RiserFS is a file system. What's the Windows one?
SMB, CIFS?
No, the N whatever it is.
Oh, NTFS?
Yeah, NTFS, derp.
Well, CIFS, Common Internet File System.
Right, NTFS is a file system. DRBD is not a file system. You could use DRBD and format it with NTFS. It would work. You could do that. All right, you could take a DRBD and then use NFS on that shit. It'd totally work.
Now, where do I use this sort of solution? Well, we talked about log files. What if I'm trying to do high availability with a database, and the way most databases work is that when you make a transaction, it is written to a log. some file systems do their own sort of transactional logging, journaling, a journalized file system.
Yep.
So the transaction's written to this log, which is a file, and then that way the database can maintain, if I do a select somewhere else before that transaction that's changing the database is completed, I see the database before that transaction. But if I'm doing the operations, I've made my own lock, then I personally, where I'm doing the changes, will see the changes I've made. And then once I commit those changes, everyone else sees them. So if I want to replicate that database, I want to, in real time, take that transaction log and have it be on my backup server at the same time. So I need very low level, perfectly reliable, like block device, DRBD style stuff.
Now, sometimes it's the wrong answer for a database, right? You could just use the database's built-in master-slave kind of setup.
Use like Cassandra or Sloaney.
Well, Cassandra is a totally different kind of thing.
Yeah, but it serves the same purpose.
Right, yeah. But I mean, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle all
MySQL
have,
has some shitty binary replication.
Well, but it works, right?
Yeah, it's shitty, but it works.
I'm just saying, but
Postgres has pretty good binary replication.
But the point is, everyone's got this master-slave replication, which totally works. But with DRBD, you could basically get master, and it doesn't even matter if you have it configured properly.
Well, yeah, you can still run into problems. Don't get us wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
But
if it's a
of all
transactional, properly ACID compliant database, and the DRBD is configured properly, and the network's fast enough, and all that stuff, it could totally work.
The moral of all of this is as such: one, from a user level, Windows-style file sharing for most people is pretty much the best because it just works. You're not going to run into any problems.
If you do it right, but most people don't do it right, which means it's weird. Like, it just works, but for 90% of people, it actually doesn't just work because they fuck it up. I don't know what it is. I think it's the user interface of it just like encourages people to do the wrong thing.
I think it's because it abstracts it a little too much.
Yeah.
NFS, you have to understand exactly what you're doing to make it work.
Which is why it works all the time.
But you have to understand what you're doing, so it's outside of the realm of people who aren't supercomputery anyway.
Yep.
And most people, even if you're doing a mount like this, there's a level higher and a level lower, and usually the solution to your problem is up or down and not in the middle.
Fuse is the higher level, and then, actual applications like, the master slave in your database or Git or something like that are the higher level. And the lower level is DRBD or even a SAN or some kind of hardware device or who knows what else.
Yep. There was a way with old SCSI, right? You could have a SCSI card, right? It has an ID of like 1. You have a hard drive at like 2, a hard drive at 3, another fucking computer at 4 that has access to the same SCSI bus.
You could do this.
I don't know if anyone ever did that, but you could
I'm sure
theoretically.
Someone did that back in the day when they bought like a 1 gigabyte hard drive for like $1,000, and then everyone connected to it with like a big SCSI daisy chain going down the row of computers. Sure, someone did that.
Yep. Notice we didn't talk about how the protocols work, because that's boring shit.
And you could look it up online, and I don't even know it off the top of my head because I would just look it up online.
I know NFS pretty well because at our IT, we talk about IT education. We had to take a whole class where we learned about the deep down bullshit of ext2, ext3, like exactly how the journal worked, SMB, NFS, and that Mac whatever. The old Mac sharing protocol, I even forget what it was. Remember Mac had its own like file sharing protocol?
Well, they still, nowadays they still do. Mac actually has sort of this new sort of like wanted to compete with Dropbox kind of iCloud thing, but they also in the same process updated in the Finder, like the thing that shares between Macs and uses Bonjour and whatever, and it's kind of weird. But if you have Macs, all Macs, and you just want to share between those, then use that because it'll totally work.
Yeah.
The same way as the Windows one. It'll actually be even easier.
And Macs, pretty much my experience with connecting them to Windows shares is I try it. It'll either just work immediately or I'll never really get it to work. And I can't figure out why.
Because they hide all the buttons and switches. So all you can really do is try the default. And if the default doesn't work, there's no other buttons to press, so you don't know what to do.
I don't know if they fixed it, but the last problem I had was if I had an anonymous share, I want anyone to be able to connect it, no authentication at all.
It keeps asking for user and password anyway.
So I'd eventually have to set up a password just for the Mac, even though everyone else can connect with
even
nothing.
Trying to use like guest doesn't work. It has to be a real account. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. And the thing is, we probably could have figured it out if we, did some research and tried, but fuck that noise.
That's right.
We're too old for research.
I'm sort of getting real hungry. Let's go.
Okay, we're done. This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geeknights is not one, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.